Hello, welcome everyone to another Commerce IQ live stream of industry trends and things you can expect to further your understanding of the state of retail e-commerce. And today, as in most of these sessions, which occur roughly once every week or every 2 weeks on Thursdays at noon Eastern at 9 a.m. Pacific, we have another topic for you, which we want to spend the next 15 minutes discussing or so. And today's topic is a sneak peek at CommerceIQ's 2023 trends and predictions. So later in the year, we're going to come out with kind of our comprehensive predictions for 2023. This is really meant to give you a sneak peek at some of those predictions, not all of them. So let's get into it, because there's a lot of really exciting stuff here I want to talk about. The first prediction that we're making at CommerceIQ is that consumer spending is at risk of declining in 2023. Of course, 2020, 2021, very strong. 2022, I would say relatively strong in spite of a lot of macroeconomic headwinds like inflation. Well, inflation kind of operates on both sides of the table, but inflation, lower consumer confidence, as well as kind of the growing threat of layoffs, and now, of course, the rising rates from the Fed. And this, of course, all started to occur and was occurring in the first half of the year when shoppers were going back to stores, when shoppers were starting to pull back a bit on the e-commerce front. And I think what this is culminating in is really declining consumer spending going into 2023. And the reason for that is inflation, perhaps it's peaked. Take a look at this chart on the left here. That's looking at inflation on a monthly basis, as reported by the government. It's still very high, right? It's still above 8% as of September 2022, the most recent month reported. So, and shoppers, they've been willing to put up with inflation, I think, for a couple of reasons, but the main one being that they couldn't spend on things like travel, entertainment, experiences during COVID, anything that required, personal interaction. And 2022, really the whole year has been about, we're finally going to go on that vacation. We're finally going to spend on all these things we couldn't spend on. Even if inflation is high, we're still going to just spend right through it, right? And probably contributing to some extent to the rise of to the elevated levels of inflation. Well, that's coming to a close, right? Winter is basically just around the corner. I think a lot of shoppers have gotten or are still getting in the fall, getting their kind of travel and experiential spend, which of course has a lot of halo effects on surrounding categories that tie into that. That I think is going to drop off, towards the farther in Q4 and into 2023. And I think if inflation persists, you're going to have a consumer who's very concerned about their tightening budget, saying, this isn't a temporary thing. It looks like inflation is a bit more long term. I really need to pull back. And in fact, perhaps the spending splurge that has already occurred could even further the pullback that we could be about to experience. I really like this data on the right here from Morning Consult, and it shows basically they ran a survey, and earlier in the survey of those respondents who said they hadn't made changes yet based on to try to save more money. If they hadn't done that yet, if inflation continued to be a problem, what would you be willing to make changes on? And this data came out in July, but it's relatively recent, very fresh. And the vast majority of people who had not yet made changes to their budget or their spending said that they would be willing to make changes to a broad variety of spending activities, right? Anything like, avoiding paying for shipping, or watching movies at home, not going to movie theaters, or shopping at discount stores. These things could all become more common and could drag on the economy if consumers are spending less if inflation continues. And in fact, for the past few months, it has been continuing. So consumer spending at risk of declining. The next one here is closely related to that, and that shoppers are becoming the ultimate opportunists. If you followed our CommerceIQ live streams before, you've probably seen some of this data already, but it's relevant for this discussion just the same. And that's that McKinsey has showed that earlier this year, this was all the way back in February, shoppers were extremely disloyal. They were willing to shop different brands than they normally shopped and different retailers that they normally shopped. And this was already an increase versus where they were in 2020. They've become increasingly disloyal since 2020. And already at 2020, that was still a high level of disloyalty. I think that's just going to continue right into 2023. And the reason that is because a lot of the macroeconomic factors I just mentioned, those are the factors that drive shopper disloyalty, right? Those are the factors that drive shoppers to look wherever they can get the best deals, wherever they are, even if they don't shop there regularly or haven't shopped there as much in the past. maybe potentially switch brands to either a private label brand or to maybe a more discount brand versus a name brand, which they might normally be more likely to buy when their budgets aren't as constrained. I expect to see a big rise in private label, a big rise in discount brands, and a lot of just brand disloyalty in general because of the macroeconomic scenario. And shoppers are reflecting this, right? I mean, the consumer sentiment index from the University of Michigan has consumer sentiment near record lows. I think the only other time it's been close to this low or at these levels are basically around 2008, of course, during the last Great Recession. And of course, that was a massive downturn. Not saying that'll be that bad, but consumer sentiment certainly is not in opposition to that idea that we're headed for a downturn. And shoppers, as a result, becoming the ultimate opportunist, shopping wherever they can get the best deal, wherever they can get the best product or offer that fulfills their needs versus something they do based on routine or based on brand legacy. For brands, that means those who do work out shopper loyalty, there's a lot of opportunity for them because it's going to be harder for the competitors to keep up. And it also means you need to be providing value and relevance for your shopper right now. Of course, that is always true, but it is especially true right now. You'll be able to rely less on routines or just repeat purchases by default than you have in the past. The third thing I want to bring up here is expect a return of discounting. So in our data, which we track, back through 2020, if you look at how discounts have changed, there's been a big change over the past year and a half, I would say. Back in May 2021, and this is taken from CommerceIQ data of CommerceIQ clients in aggregate from first-party vendors on Amazon. What we saw was that of items that were on sale, the average steepness of that discount was 31% off in May 2021. Since that time, it has fallen, sometimes in large jumps, sometimes in smaller, uneven jumps. But it has been pretty consistent in its decline over the past 16 months. Up until the last month, September, the average discount level for items on sale, 23%, a drop of 8 percentage points. So discounts have been kind of being phased out, or at least extreme discounts have been phased out over the past year and a half. I think that's going to change. At the same time, what we have also seen over the past couple of years, I would say before 2022, was that discounts, the steepness of discounts didn't actually increase that much for key holiday periods. Think like past Prime days, even things like Black Friday. You didn't see a huge steepness in increase in discounts. That's changing. Recently in Prime Day in July, and this data we show here, which is most recently in Prime's early access sale, we look at the daily data in terms of discounts. What we saw was that discounts have started to rise for several, maybe the whole month through, but for several key holiday periods or days, which wasn't the case earlier, I would say, in 2021 and 2022. And that is and what that means is that for Prime's early access day sale, we saw a rise of discounts of about 5 percentage points from a low point of about 23%, which is kind of the average for the month of September, rising all the way up to 29% for the second day of that sale. But interestingly, that wasn't even the best deals. The best deals occurred several days later on the 16th of October, where steepness of discounts reached 31%. And there were almost as good deals several days before, 28%. So all to say, discounts are returning. They're returning for key holiday periods at the very least, and days around that period, right? It might not even be the day that's most advertised. So as a brand, you want to be looking for where are those opportunities to raise discounts that might not even be directly on the holiday itself. But I think shoppers can expect more discounts in the future on discount holidays as well as days around that time. The next prediction here is it's kind of already come true to some extent. This was formulated actually before this announcement, but I would expect more retail consolidation in 2022 to drive scale and efficiency for the organizations involved. And of course, the big example here that has already occurred this year, more recently, is Kroger's intended acquisition of Albertsons. And I think some of the factors that play into this merger are the same sorts of factors that will play into similar mergers that will play out in 2022. So let's look at what those are. Here you kind of have a heat map, maybe not a heat map, but a store location map. Both Kroger and Albertsons. These aren't particularly recent, but neither has expanded drastically, say compared to like Dollar General. Neither has expanded drastically in the years between when now and when these charts came out. I think the Kroger one is from maybe a year or two ago, and the Albertsons one is from Actually, I think it's 7 years ago, but still, it still serves the purpose, which is that you get to see where the majority of their stores are and kind of overlap them on top of each other. And what you see is that they don't overlap a ton. They overlap on the West Coast, and they overlap on select locations, kind of in the DC area, if you will, up until Pennsylvania and New York, that corridor. That's where they overlap. That's where Kroger and Albertsons overlap in terms of store locations. Midwest, Kroger has a dominant presence. Looking farther into the West, and a bit in New England as well, and some places on the West Coast, Albertsons has a dominant presence, which Kroger does not. To the point where they do overlap, again, kind of that DC, New York corridor, and some spots on the West Coast. But they fundamentally have different geographies. And what this means is that, A, I think it's unlikely to be challenged by the FTC, and B, it also means that Kroger and Albertsons can reap efficiencies of scale, because now they have kind of you look at the national at a national level and broken out by different regions of who the U.S. grocery shopper is. They can use that data to drive efficiency, to drive personalization. And at the same time, just with the greater scale, Kroger, who's more known for low margin, high volume business, can potentially introduce some of that model to Albertsons, which is known more as a higher margin, slightly lower volume business. Kroger, I would say if Kroger brings some of that discipline into Albertsons, that would be good for both entities. It would also be good for shoppers, because it would mean that shoppers of Albertsons stores could potentially find lower prices at those stores after the merger goes through and they've had time to plan. All to say, why do they want to do this? It drives efficiency. It drives incremental growth or incremental scale, I would say. There's not a ton of overlap or cannibalization going on, so it's a natural partnership. And again, it's I think for Kroger, it's all about driving scale and efficiency. They can drive more efficiency, and they can use that data to really understand who their shopper is and who the Albertsons, the combined entity shopper is. So what does that mean what does that mean for 2022, right? Or 2023. And that number there should be 2023, not 2022. 2023 consolidation, you're going to see a growing number of mergers based on, we're concerned about falling consumer spend. We're concerned about, recession that we're currently in, most likely. How do we find organizations to partner with and to combine with that will make the total organization as efficient as possible, right? Not necessarily about, about finding incremental growth, but more about how do we become, completely efficient. Getting the combined view of all grocery shoppers, of almost all major markets of grocery shoppers in the U.S. from a combined Kroger Albertsons entity, that's a key step towards that, right? That gives you scale and that gives you efficiency. You're going to see more mergers driven by efficiency in 2023. The last one here is about the Metaverse. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about the Metaverse. I think I'll add my name to a growing chorus that say the Metaverse will not take off in 2022. Facebook actually just reported its most recent quarterly earnings, and investors were not happy. Shares plunged 24%. The reason for that is because they're investing a lot in expenses. They're ramping up their expenditures, and a large part of that is the Metaverse, which they're investing heavily in. There are some fundamental problems with this, though, which I think will have some problems for both Meta as a company and the Metaverse as a concept. And what are those, right? If you look at the bottom right, that's one of them right there. That's Horizon Worlds, Facebook's kind of dominant Metaverse flagship product. Here's the problem with the Metaverse or conceptions of the Metaverse, whether it's Facebook or elsewhere. I would say it is a solution in search of a problem, and that it has no dominant use case that it helps solve for your shopper or consumer, right? The shopper or consumer really isn't looking for a Metaverse space to solve some fundamental problem that they will now flock to now that it's available. It is kind of being treated as a hangout space, or a space you can, meet with your virtual buddies and kind of interact in ways that you couldn't do, say, over the phone or over a video conference call. The problem is that functionality is relatively limited, and there are already existing places that people can do that, right? I mean, if you look at the dominant use case of the Metaverse, to some extent, a lot of it is in gaming. Well, there are already, large online multiplayer games where people can do just this in an arguably more fleshed out, purpose-driven world than currently exists in various conceptions of the Metaverse. So there's no dominant use case. The next thing is that the tech, or at least the visual appeal, lags behind expectations. I mean, if you look at that, again, that image in the bottom right, I would say it does not, the graphical capabilities today kind of extend far beyond this. I understand that there's reasons why it has to look like this, but still, it's not what consumers expect. Consumers don't want to, spend time in a virtual environment that looks like it could have been created in 2003. The other thing is the industry is too disconnected, I would say, or not. Perhaps disconnection is the wrong word. It's not consolidated enough, right? There is no dominant, this is the metaverse that everyone will flock to and use. There are more competing conceptions of the metaverse. And as a result, it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario where which came first, or what do you need first? Do you need to develop the metaverse and then people will come to it? Or do you need kind of a certain scale built in to a metaverse, and then that will continue to attract more scale? And I would say the problem right now is that if not enough people use the metaverse, you're going to dissuade additional users from joining the metaverse because there's not enough people to hang out with. And right now, it doesn't have that critical mass, and it doesn't look like the metaverse, whether it's Facebook's version or another version, has a clear path to reach or incentivize a critical mass before it can become self-sustaining. All to say, I think these problems combined to mean that the metaverse will not take off in 2022. Perhaps it's just a little early, might take off later, but right now it doesn't really solve key use for shoppers. The technology and the visual appeal isn't there versus other similar options that consumers can engage with in a virtual environment, or even just computer environment. And it's the scale isn't there to drive even more scale. That wraps us up. Those are 5 predictions we have for what's going to unfold in 2023, or the latter half of 2022 and 2023. If you are interested in, I would say if you're interested or have any questions about this, please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer them. Also, keep an eye out for our Trends and Predictions 2023 piece that will be coming out later this year, which will include further expound on some of these concepts, as well as include others as well. And if you like these presentations, just check out the CommerceIQ LinkedIn page. They typically occur at the same time in a given week when they occur, and that is noon on Thursdays, Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, West Coast. With that being said, have a great rest of your week, and I will present to you later.